Welcome to another episode of the BS Podcast, the show that looks at how behavioural change insights are being applied in the wild. Episodes feature renowned behavioural experts across industries and organisations, from management and marketing to policy and public health, and more. Let's dive in and see what all the BS is about. Here's your host from The Behaviourist, Nick Hobson.
Hello, BS listeners, and welcome back to another show. Of course, this episode, if you tuned in last week, follows on the heels of last week's launch of the Global Association for Applied Behavioral Scientists, or GABS. Myself and other board members are just really happy with the reception so far from folks in the notes and the emails and the messages we've got on mostly LinkedIn and Twitter. So thank you for that. And I think what it has done is it just has really confirmed any sort of prior hypotheses I've had about our field and about the people in our field. We're just good people, like sort of like salt of the earth, and we just really care about science and scientists and people, which is really cool. So if you haven't already, go to gabs.org. That's GAABS. Of course, that lovely acronym, and check out all the pages on the register and sign up and look for more stuff in the coming weeks from myself and from the others on the team. Today, though, I'm excited to welcome Lindsay Kohler to the show. Lindsay is a reformed communication consultant turned to behavioral science to figure out why we do what we do, especially when it comes to poor health and financial decisions. With over a decade of employee engagement consulting experience with Fortune 500 companies and an MSc in behavioral science from the London School of Economics, Lindsay uses that experience to help bridge the gap between theory and action to maximize performance. Her thoughts on employee engagement have appeared in many HR publications such as Workforce, HRDirector, and CorpComms Magazine, and recently also in Forbes, which I love reading. And Lindsay is currently the lead behavioral scientist at the UK consultancy Scarlettabbott. Lindsay, welcome to the show.
Hi, Nick. Thanks for having me.
Scarlettabbott, did I say that right?
You did.
First. Okay. What's the? Can you explain a bit of the name, the origin of the name, and then we can get into more.
Yeah, we can explain the origin because there are a million ways to pronounce it, to spell it, to misspell it, but it does have a story because you would not be that complicated of a name without a story. So Abbott is the last name of our company's co-founder, and Scarlett is the name of his first wife. So it just worked.
Ah, perfect. It does. It sounds. I was thinking like Scarlettabbott. You know, it could go any which way. But okay, I'm glad I got it. Well, yes, welcome to the show. It's really great to have you here. I'm excited for a number of reasons. Like we said when we were just chatting offline, we feel like we've sort of chatted and been LinkedIn friends, but here we are sort of meeting for the first time and actually talking about behavioral science. And just your line of work is sort of very similar to the line of work I do, that I sort of found myself, or I stumbled upon, which is more on the like sort of employee engagement and organizations and leadership. So yeah, really just happy and excited to nerd out with you on this sort of stuff. So I want to jump in. You, as I said, you're writing for Forbes, and you have this one piece in particular on this young woman who everyone either loves to love or loves to hate. Why that's the case, I don't know. And there's this recent documentary which I actually recommend people watch. Of course, I'm talking about T Swift. So Taylor Swift, as I said, like there's this sort of impression of her, and I don't know where it comes from or why people think of her the way they do, but for what it's worth, she's an incredible musician, an incredible businesswoman. So can you tell listeners, if they haven't read that piece, and I'll link to it in the show notes, of course, but if you can just tell them what Taylor Swift has to do with employee engagement and organizations and leadership.
Sure. Well, my number one rule is if you want to be the best, you need to learn from the best and you need to copy from the best. And I am a firm believer in, cross-discipline pollination. I read so much from so many fields because there's always an idea that you can adapt to your area of expertise to create something I think that's really new and effective. And I was thinking about Taylor the other day when her album came out, and I thought, God, that's such a departure from what she's always done. And then I realized that a lot of the marketing that she's done around the promotion of her eighth album, Folklore, and even the decision to release it was just like brilliant. And there were so many lessons we could take. So, first and foremost, I was thinking about this fact that, novelty captures attention. So, when we notice something, new or unexpected in our, environment, we just, our heads pivot toward it, our ears stand up at attention, and it captures our attention. So, what I liked what Taylor Swift did there was she really leveraged that power of difference by breaking her tried and true, promotional model, right? Nobody was expecting her to drop an album. So of course, everyone had to tune in and pay attention. And so, I thought that was a great lesson. And then I thought, well, what does that look like for employee engagement, right? So, novelty in our world, I guess, would be going for something that's original, or maybe it's unexpected. Maybe it's a little bit surprising. So, when I joke about this, it could even be something like your CEO handing out, flyers outside the front of the building dressed up in, like a chicken suit or something. But, what's that one thing you're going to do that captures attention?
Yeah. So a couple questions there. Why was it, and I'm showing my lack of knowledge of Taylor Swift and pop music in general. Why was it novel, or why was it particularly surprising or shocking that she was dropping this album? Folklore, right? Is what it's called.
Yeah, Folklore. So I hadn't been a T Swift fan until last year. I hadn't paid much attention to her music, but her model was always to release an album every 2 years on the money. So people knew every 2 years they were going to get a new Taylor Swift album. Well, she released her seventh in August of last year. So she only went, 10, 11 months in between albums. So it was absolutely shocking to everybody. But she did a few other things that, employee engagement specialists can learn from. She pivoted her strategy, right? Like she knows that to make money in the model that we traditionally have, which is you've got, a radio hit, you've got, a promotional tour that you headline for 2 years, and you milk every dollar you can from one album. Well, that's not really happening anymore, right? We've got people stuck at home. We can't go to concerts. We have short attention spans. And so she quickly realized that her tried and true way of doing things wasn't going to work. And I think the businesses that look at their communication strategies, that look at their people strategy and realize that something drastically has to change, and it has to change quickly for them to stay relevant, are going to be much better positioned to be successful than those who don't, especially in the wake of something like a global pandemic. And we don't know what the next event will be, but there will be something.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. That's really cool. Because I think about this a lot as in my job as behavioral scientist, psychologist, kind of turned marketer, hack marketer at that, is the question of delivering content and putting content out there at a regular cadence. And so that it's consistent, and so that your audience can come to expect when it's coming and what it is. People like sort of a level of certainty. I mean, at a very fundamental psychological level, we like certainty, but then there's also clear instances and situations like this where you disrupt that certainty or that cadence, like she did with dropping this particular album. And what you said, like to start it, is that obviously like piques people's interest. They go, oh, that's interesting. I wonder what's going on there. So obviously humans are complex, and it's not always the case that consistency is key or is going to win out. There's plenty of situations. I even think about songs, I mean, pop songs especially, will hit that same, right? It's like verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, sometimes verse, sometimes outro. But basically, there is a signature to every pop song. But then sometimes there won't be a bridge, or sometimes the bridge will be extended by twice as long, or something that kind of just throws the person's expectations out the window. And and that I think is a really good tactic, generally speaking. And one other thing I wanted to touch on, which if we can dig into a little bit more, is what you said at the beginning, where you go to other sources or you go to other, not even industries and fields, but it sounds like you just like music in this case, or a musician, to get inspiration or to learn about other things, which then will inspire you or provoke a thought or an idea for your work or our field as behavioral scientists. I do that all the time. And I remember when I was in graduate school doing like actual sort of research, basic research, I would read paper, like, the really long, boring academic papers.
Mhm.
I thought that every good researcher started those boring papers. That's where you went to for research ideas. And I would just like hit my head on the wall, trying to find a research idea. And then I'd read a fiction book or some other book that's totally unrelated. And I'd get my research idea from there. So do you do this often? And where do you go primarily to get inspiration or ideas that are outside of our training?
Yeah, I do this often. And actually, it's part of why I became a behavioral scientist, because before I was a behavioral scientist, I was turning to the field to get inspiration for what I did. But we can come back to that. Yeah, I look everywhere, and one of the biggest areas that I've recently been getting inspiration from is from Taoism. So my boyfriend is really into Chinese medicine and Tai Chi, and I'll be saying something to him that behavioral science that I find so interesting, and then he'll say, "Oh, well, that's like the story of the monkey and the apples," and then he'll be able to root something like time discounting into some ancient proverb written 3,000 years ago, where you know somebody already hit the nail on the head, but that's currently where I'm finding a lot of inspiration, because I think, a large part of what makes things memorable or meaningful is really around storytelling. And so when I look at who tells stories well and what are they doing that's making it land, that gives me a lot of inspiration for how I want to write, how I want to share knowledge back out to the industry, which I think is really important, especially as it starts to really gain feet, and there's more and more behavioral science teams and units cropping up. There is, I think, an onus on how do you share knowledge in a way that's really effective. So yeah, I look everywhere. And you're right, you just never know when you're going to have an aha moment. You could be cooking dinner and there's like a way that, oh, I had an aha moment the other day. It was my laundry machine. I remember when I moved in, I really wanted to stop living out of a suitcase. I was so excited to do my first load of laundry. I open up the door to my new laundry room, and like, I kid you not, there were probably 17 dials and settings. And I'm looking at it. I don't know what to do with this. If ever there was a case to make, the case for keeping things simple, and you're going to lose users along the way if there's friction, it's like, look at my washing machine, because I was like, well, I guess I'll have to burn everything I own and buy a new wardrobe because I don't know how to use this. So it's an everyday life. I'm always on the lookout for inspiration.
Yes, that's great. Well, first, I think you're the only person who will ever say that they were excited to do laundry. So I will say that, because it is the absolute bane of my existence. But going back to the sort of the Taoist, and I was really into Eastern myth and spiritualism back in the day. Still am for sure. But when it comes to religion or myth, and I mean, this is Eastern or Western religion, I think it makes sense to, I'm not religious or particularly spiritual, but it does make sense to go to those places and those books and those stories or parables for certain psychological truths. Yeah. I mean, like, those have been around for literally hundreds, thousands of years, as you said, and they've stood the test of time. So why have they stood the test of time? Well, because they're recounting stories, and they're telling us things, about people and about situations that, irrespective of the time, they are still true. And so, yeah, to pull little tactics or ideas about what they did and apply it, put a twist on it and translate it into current context, into our current industry, I think that's really cool. Now we just have to like make a religion out of our field of behavioral science.
Well, there's some people that are well on their
That's
way
what
to
Gab
doing
did.
that.
Yes, yeah. Little do listeners know that Gab is really just it's a covert mission to create a cult and
There's
get
your
people to
tagline.
drink. Yeah. Speaking of communications and PR. Okay. That's a joke if anyone's wondering. Gabs is not a cult. We are legitimate. So let's, of course, we can't have a conversation these days without talking COVID. Here we are at the time we're recording this and releasing. We're for the second week of September. And for me, my wife is a teacher, and being in academic and in school for basically forever. September was always this time of like, new fresh starts and this temporal and motivational resets. You're back to school. Everyone's back from summer holidays. But this one and this time feels really different from previous years. People aren't piling back into the offices. They aren't packing back into the meeting rooms. They aren't traveling. They aren't getting on planes to travel to client sites. They are sitting in their home offices, if they have one, donning their finest sweatpants or pajamas. And they're doing Zoom call after Zoom call after Zoom call. So work, as we know, within a short period of time has just become totally disrupted. And it is just such a different experience for everyone. It's quite amazing. So we're of course, majority of us will be working from home for the foreseeable future, probably at least until summer 2021 is what I've heard from the experts. As somebody who works, in employee engagement and workplace motivation, what are some of the trends you're seeing? What do we have to be on the lookout for? What do leaders have to be worried about or, excited about? And what do employees have to be worried or excited about? Can you give us the inside scoop, if you
So I think what organizations are finding, the longer COVID goes on, is that their people are tired, they're frustrated, and they've got really low motivation and really low morale. And, I've been thinking about those two concepts as related but different. So, with motivation, you can be really highly motivated but have really low morale at the same time. And they're both important issues to address. So, with motivation, as you know, it's part of what motivates us to do anything is we have to believe that it's in our, ability to do so, that it's going to have some sort of impact, and that, there's going to be some sort of reward for it, whether external or just internal. And I think right now when we're not together, we're really feeling a bit of a gratitude void. So like, I don't really see the visible impact of my work like I would if I was with my colleagues, where they can say thank you, or they can quickly say, oh, that insight you had here, the client really loved it. It's those casual moments of interaction that we're not getting anymore, that I actually think provide really valuable forms of external feedback, and that thank you that goes a long way. So with, clients, we've been talking a lot about how, what campaigns are needed to really, or policy shifts are needed to help increase motivation, because, we're in it for the long haul. And then morale, again, it's really, spirits are pretty low. We've taken a hit. There's new forms of frustration. For example, the neighbors that live above me, their lockdown home improvement project was replacing all of their floors, which was really fun when you were locked inside all day working. So you can imagine how my morale was after, 6 weeks of that. Yes, of all the lockdown projects.
Wow.
But we have to look at that, square on. And I think any, well-being strategy has to keep morale in mind and thinking about what you can do to boost that. So, I've told clients just even doing feel-good campaigns just for the heck of it. Nick, I don't know if you saw it, but at the start of lockdown, the actor John Krasinski put together this really silly video show called Some Good News.
Yes,
did you see
I
that?
did see it. Yeah. Yeah, I love him.
Yeah, and it had no purpose other than to share like good news and make people smile. And so, I've talked to clients about, could you produce your own version of that, or could you add a feel good channel to,
Mm,
your enterprise social network where people share things like,
mm,
the silliest time my dog interrupted me, or the best thing about lockdown that I want to keep. So what are those sharing those bright
mm.
spots and those funny stories that can make people laugh? That has a place in your internal comms strategy. It has a place in your well-being strategy.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, that's great. I love that idea, like a John Krasinski, like, yeah, thing at home, because you have. I mean, it's stressful. It's been stressful for, I'd say, mostly everyone. Anyone I talk to,
Mm,
it's hard. Um, and for me, and for a lot of people I know as well, clients and friends and family, like the way you deal with it is, at least
yeah.
for me, through humor. Like, you find the lightness in all of this craziness that we're going
Yeah.
through, and like just Zoom calls and how those are totally weird. So I think that's a great idea. Have you heard? I'm curious to get your thoughts on this. I know Adam Grant and others have been pushing for the 6-hour workday as opposed to the 8-hour
Mm,
workday, and this is something I've thought about a lot as well. Who decided, and at what point, that that children who go to school, daycare, kindergarten, or school, would have a 6-hour, like more or less a 6-hour workday, and it would end their day would end at 3, but their parents would have a work day that is 8 hours. So you have this awkward 2 hour, like between 3 to 5 or 3 and 6 o'clock, where, like, what do you do with your kid? Um,
mhm.
so I don't get it. And I'm now seeing, because of all these sort of like disruptions in COVID and new things happening, um, that they're seriously talking about the 6-hour workday. What is your thought about it? Do you have any insights?
I don't have any insights in terms of companies that are going to move toward it, but I definitely have an opinion about it. Um, so
Mm,
I think that one of the bright sides of COVID means that we're pushing organizational cultures away from presenteeism. You've got people that are like, well, if I show up at 9 and I leave at 5, I've done my job. And you no
mm,
longer have that source of validation. So I think COVID is exposing the people that had their butt in the chair all day but didn't really do much versus those that are much more output based. So I think performance measures are going to change to output. And it doesn't matter if it takes you 1 hour, 3 hours, 6 hours, you know what you're supposed to accomplish. And I think that we're going to shift to that because in this remote working environment, I think as long as you're contactable during your mutually agreed upon work hours, nobody actually cares when you're doing the work as long as they can reach you when you're generally supposed to be available. I mean, nobody cares
mm,
that I'm a morning person and a lot of times I'll do my writing from 6 to 10. Then I go for a workout. Then I need a long lunch break because my mind doesn't really work between noon and 2. And then I'll come back on and I'll do a bit more work, available the whole time. But I think that you'll have a lot happier people, you'll get better output, and you won't have any, I think, impacts to, GDP or performance. And I think it will shine a light on those that maybe rested on their laurels a bit, that all they had to do was show up.
mhm.
Um, that's the good side of it, right? But there's kind of a flip side to the remote working culture too. That's with organizational trust and such that's been surfaced.
Yeah, yeah. I want to get into that in a sec, but just to go back to the freedom and the autonomy, like, speaking of motivation,
Mm-hmm.
and if we're sort of approaching from a self-determination theory, just the amount of autonomy that it provides the individual. And I'm talking about like distributed work and remote
Yeah.
working, um, is amazing. Like you said, you can get up and have that really deep work, focused work from 6 to 10, and then you can like go and like work out. Like, I remember when I was working out of grad school, I worked at a big consultancy where there was the complete lack of autonomy and freedom in terms of work hours. And I remember, because I was coming from academia and it was like my first like real job, And I would like, yeah, I'm going to go work out. Like there's a gym. And they looked at me. They're like, are you shitting me? Like, no, you're not going to work out. And I was like, what? And I lasted 4 months there because I was like, this will kill you, and that's what they do. Right. And he talks about this is, I'm drawing a blank on his name, but I'll find it and put it in the show notes. The founder of WordPress. And my understanding is that WordPress was one of the first, like we're talking back in the day, just truly distributed teams, global team that didn't have a headquarters, that didn't have sort of an in-office location. And when whoever this individual is, I'm drawing a blank on the name, whenever he did come out with it, people, the critics were like, yeah, it'll work with 10 people. Sure. Cause you're 10 people, but what are you going to do when you scale to 100? And then he did. And then the critics said, yeah, well, 100, what are you going to do when you scale to 1,000? And then he did. And now they're at like tens of thousands of a truly global distributed team. And they're still, I think like 40% of the entire internet is powered by WordPress. So talking about like productivity, no, it has not taken a hit. And he mentions this fun little anecdote where like so many people can relate to this too, where when you go into the office and you're either freezing or so hot because you of course don't have control over the temperature. Simple things like that matters, right? Like I'm at home and I can turn my AC up or down. You can turn your AC up or down depending, or if we're in the winter and the heat. That matters. Little things like that matter a great deal.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And so I think everyone was forced to change because they didn't have a choice. So change actually became the default, I guess, during these times. But I think it's going to be for the better for those companies that see the opportunity, though, and don't, hold on to the old ways of working. And I think people that hold on to the old ways of working, it is rooted, I think, in lack of trust and insecurity. And, for them, I guess the proof will be in the pudding, when the results come out and they perform just as well, if not better, than prior quarters.
Yeah, let the data do the talking, right? If like especially as behavioral scientists in industry who are working with clients, our client partners, like, and there is data coming out to show that not only are people happier with the 6-hour workday, feel they have more freedom, so wellness is improved, but they're equally, if not more, productive, which you like. Obviously, some people wouldn't expect, but the data are the data, and we have to sort of follow that as opposed to these authority, intuitions or hunches that were based on authority of the good old days. When an 8-hour or 10-hour work shift made sense because you had to like produce widgets in a factory. But now, with respect to the knowledge economy, like you said, you can, it should be an output driven system instead of processes. I think the trick with that is because we're not producing widgets or these sort of tangible things. What constitutes is like, yep, I finished my work for the day because I wrote, what is it, like 2,000 words, or because I had 19 Zoom meetings. Like what do you think is that that output? How do we operationalize and measure that output for like your classic knowledge economy?
God, that is a good question. I was having a similar chat about this just yesterday with a colleague who was feeling that even though we were working remote, she had to be there 9 to 5:30, and if she went, to all of her meetings in the day, that, she had done what she needed to do, but she was like, I don't feel like I've had time to do what I want to get done because of all of these meetings and because of this 9 to 5. But I think for knowledge workers, well, again, I say, let the proof be in the pudding. What's your revenue like? How many articles are you publishing? What links are you getting? What new leads is it generating? I mean, I always come back to, I come back to money for better or for worse. I should have been a CFO in my last life, but because the knowledge economy is important, it's really hard to measure measure output, I guess. It's harder. You can say, oh, I wrote 3 articles, 2,000 words, but again, are those 2,000 words great or are they rubbish? So again, it needs to come back to value. And the biggest and easiest way I know how to quantify value in an organization is with money, for better or for worse.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Totally. So let's pivot a little bit. I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, and this might be totally out of the blue, but it's mostly selfish. This question that I'm asking you right now is because it's sort of just a project that I'm working on, a side project, which I'm totally fascinated by and with, and that is, I'm curious. Have you heard of the Stanford duck syndrome?
No, but please tell me. I love ducks. No, I do. My home team, Portland, Oregon girl, my home team's the Oregon Ducks. So if it's even remotely related to a duck, I want to know about
Oh,
it.
that's cute. That's kind of adorable, actually. What kind of team? What sport was it? Is it
College football.
football? Okay, so this is interesting because most, like, it's like the tigers or the leopards or the lions, like some like ferocious animal, but here we have the ducks. Which, sorry, I actually really want to visit Portland, mostly because I'm a fake hipster and have a mustache, and that's sort of like the land of the mustache and hipsters. But the ducks is that's a good one. I like that. So yes, the Stanford duck syndrome is this idea that your top agencies and firms in the knowledge economy, and we're primarily talking about sort of consulting agencies, legal and law firms, and investment banking. So like basically traditionally what most MBA students and grads go to, and as of late, graduate students and PhDs as well. And what I've heard is that these schools are recruiting, these MBA students, these MBA grads, and these PhD graduates as well from your your Stanfords, your Stanfords, your Harvards, your Ivy League schools. It's where they go. Why? Because they're smart, they're keen, they're motivated, and obviously, if they're having an MBA training, they're gonna have good business acumen and good business sense. So, the problem is that a lot of these students are what you call anxious overachievers. So they're smart, they're keen, as I said, they're motivated, and they're just the right amount of emotional instability and neurotic. So there's a lot of these people. Why do I know that? Because I am one of them, as an anxious overachiever, and it's why I was successful as a student, and it's why I'm hopefully successful as a consultant now. What are your thoughts on the Stanford duck? And I should explain, why is it the Stanford duck? Is because above the water, a duck glides, and it looks very sort of placid and peaceful and calm. Meanwhile, under the surface, their legs are kicking furiously. So that's the fun little metaphor, is that under the surface, people are kicking furiously to stay afloat, and they look like they're fine on the surface because they're wearing a really nice suit, and they present themselves really well, but really they're an emotional mess. So what are your thoughts on the Stanford duck?
Yeah, well, I think that's a workplace mentoring challenge. I think it's a management challenge. And really, it's about how do we help leaders and managers kind of recognize those traits in some of their top performers? Because chances are most of their top performers might be a Stanford duck. And of course, they would never admit that they were feeling the ways that you were talking about, because you would never admit that you were feeling, anxious, if, that you were unsure of yourself. And that probably, I think, exacerbates the issue. So, I really feel like that's like a tricky but important management issue to understand. What are the right ways to check in with these people? What is the right way to provide feedback in organizations? And also, what's the right way to help them see the path forward and groom them, into what they can be? Because you hire people not necessarily for what they've done, although that's important, but you're hiring people hopefully for what you think they can do in that role with the right team, the right growth. So I think it's a mentoring challenge, because it's tricky. We all I think we all struggle, I do too, with this idea of imposter syndrome, or there's so many people out there that are doing it better or faster, or they have more articles published than you, or, and you just have to, sometimes you just need a lot of handholding, a lot of feedback, until you get enough successes under you that you realize you don't have to paddle so frantically.
Yeah, exactly. And, ironically, as it happens, and at least for me, once you sort of hit that stride and you're not kicking or paddling so frantically, that's when the work feels so much better. But I have
Yeah.
to remind myself as that as well. And we're
Well,
all
and
going
you
to
get
become
you get
Daniel
there
Kahneman
faster.
eventually.
Oh my gosh, if only, right?
Exactly. So, last question for you, or two more. Let's say two more, if that's all right.
All right.
Um, what you, as I said in the bio, like you were this previous communications consultant turned behavioral scientist. So what was that journey? What was it? And I've actually just coined this term. What was the Ariely aha moment? Did you read a book? Did you watch a TED talk? Did you
Oh
attend a
my
keynote?
God,
Like,
it was
what was
Dan
that moment you were like,
Ariely's book.
behavioral
It
science? Was it? Listeners, I swear we didn't plan that. That was.
Oh my God. Okay. No, I'll tell you quickly the story. I consider predictably irrational like a gateway drug into behavioral science, but I was working in benefits communication at the start of my career at a Fortune 500 in America, and a big part of the internal communication game there is all about health, because employers have so much skin in the game, right? Because they pay the claims that their employees have, so they pay for medical claims, and healthcare is very expensive in America, and I won't go down that road now. But I kept thinking, why aren't all these campaigns that tell people to eat better and stop smoking and drink less, like, why are people still doing it? They know better. We told them it's not good for them. And I couldn't figure out why education alone wasn't enough to change behavior, surprise, surprise. So a colleague of mine, he gave me the book Predictably Irrational by Dan Ariely. And I was reading through it and I thought, oh God, some of these concepts are so simple. I don't know why we don't apply them to our communications. So a few months later, we were running a campaign to encourage people to save more in their retirement accounts and at least save enough to meet the matching employer contribution. And it had always been the same old campaign that a consultancy did. Maybe they would, I don't know, update the colors if we were lucky. But in this one year, I said, no. I was like, I want to try something. I was like, first, I want to tell them with a personalized calculation how much money they left on the table by not meeting the match. So a little bit of that sort of a take on loss aversion. And then we also told them how many other people in their team were contributing enough. So leveraging a little bit of social proof. And those are two tiny, tiny changes we made. And over 50% more people than the year before increased their contributions. And so at that point, I was hooked because I thought, God, these are such simple things that can be applied. And so I started doing more and more of that because I realized there weren't people in the space that understood health and benefits communication like well enough. They didn't really have that full understanding of the problem domain and the understanding of behavioral science to sort of bridge that gap between theory and something they could actually take and apply to their next campaign. And so I started making that my goal. And along the way, I got to work I got to partner with Dan on a project around a health and wellness conference for employers. And then I was kind of hooked. And I thought, this is really what I want to do. And, I didn't want to be a charlatan doing it. I didn't want, and you can only learn so much from the New York Times bestseller list too. At some point you really do need to, go back and get a proper education. So that's what I did, and what led me to this role, which I actually created. So it hadn't really existed at any agency before. So I got a chance to really pitch it and craft it and shape it to really have the value and impact that I knew that it could. And luckily for me, I found the right place that said, I think our co-founder's word to me when she hired me was, I have no idea if this is going to work, but let's give it a go and see what happens. And my anniversary is in my 1-year anniversary from starting is in a few days. So I think we can all agree it worked out well.
Yeah, and absolutely. I'm of course not surprised. And that story that you say of like they didn't have an actual dedicated role, and you came in and kind of pitched it and sold it. I've heard that a lot as of late, and not just within like sort of smaller SMBs, but also like Fortune 100 big companies, insurance, tech, banking, where they don't have a behavioral insights unit, and then a person comes on and maybe to interview for another role or something sort of tangentially related, and they say, you know what, this would be perfect for a behavioral specific practitioner, and then they pitch the idea, and it ends up being a perfect fit. Not surprising, because you can show value and you can show the ROI. So that's a really cool story, and early congratulations on the upcoming 1-year anniversary.
Thank you.
So last question for you. It's called the BBB, or the Big Behavioral Brainstorm, as you probably know. So of all of the issues that exist today, which one, and only one, would you say could stand to benefit from a behavioral related intervention?
Yeah, such a good question. I think that the issue of fairness and inequality, it's always been there, but I think COVID and Black Lives Matters have really kind of catapulted that into the conversation and maybe exposed it in a way that we can't ignore and that we know we need to fix. I feel like I'm just name dropping behavioral scientists left and right now, but I was sat next to Robert Cialdini at a conference a few years back, and he said something that always stuck with me on this issue. And he said that it's not really inequality that bothers people. Like, we're kind of okay with it. It's really more a lack of fairness. So, because the idea is if you all start from the same place, then equality, it's really more a measure of, how hard you've worked. But we know that nobody is starting from the same place. There's this incredible lack of fairness that is really causing the inequality. So I think there's this really interesting issue there that at the societal level, I think behavioral science can help. And I definitely think at the workplace level, because I think in workplaces it was really exposed just in terms of who got to work from home and who had to continue going in and working on the front lines and, exposing themselves to this dangerous disease. So I think it's a big one and a worthy one for behavioral scientists to really think about how we can help.
Yeah, that's great. And I totally agree. And just a couple follow-ups on that. There is, not surprising, I guess, data coming out to show that there is a huge asymmetry in the people who were forced to go back to work in like the peak of the pandemic because just of the nature of their jobs. They were considered quote unquote essential workers. And there's far greater proportion of already marginalized individuals in the community who were part of those essential workers who had to go back to work. So yeah, you're totally right. And we've heard it time and again that COVID and a global pandemic lays bare the inequities and the inequalities that exist within a society. So I think we have our work cut out for us for sure. And one final point is you mentioned Bob Cialdini. He's actually, this is a little bit of a sneak peek, a bit of a psychological tactic. He will be next week's episode, folks. So stay tuned for that. And he'll be talking about some of that stuff as well. So that's a perfect little segue between episodes. But for now, Lindsay, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was a real treat.
Thanks so much. It was so much fun.
Hey, Nick here once more. A final farewell note before ending. All the show notes, links to papers, resources, and materials mentioned in the episode can be found on the BS podcast page of The Behaviorist, where you can find all episodes and lots of other interesting and easy to apply sciencey stuff. Just go to www.behaviorist.biz/BS podcast. The show is edited and co-produced by Laura Christine and Noelle Rain, and all visual artwork, banners, and animated GIFs are created by the talented Iris Deng of dengit.org. That's DENGIT.org. Check it out. And lastly, if you'd like to join me in the mission of spreading the good BS word, remember to rate and review the show on iTunes. A lot of work goes into these episodes, and a little love would go a long way. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, remember, keep your facts ugly and your hypotheses beautiful.